Rugrats, still babies after all these years, is pretty great. This is a Rugrats documentary from 2001, and if you ever watched Rugrats, if it ever meant anything to you, either now as a child, I thoroughly recommend this. It's really fascinating. It's directed by Jim Duffy and Paul Demeyer, written by Tom Cohen, and narrated by Amanda Bynes. And the narration is very clear, it's easy to follow. The narration is generally well written, but Bynes does occasionally refer to the show as the Rugrats. Now, I don't mind people referring to the babies as the Rugrats. I don't mind people saying the Rugrats as a slip of the tongue, but this is a scripted narration. And I'm not entirely sure how the definitive article managed to slip through the net so many times, since it's called Rugrats, not the Rugrats. But if that's the biggest issue I have with this, I think it's done pretty well. I was surprised to see the whole thing's less than half an hour, and while I personally would have wanted it to be longer, I actually feel like they covered everything. And I wasn't feeling like they missed out on anything or like there was information that I really wanted that they didn't give me. It's basically a look at the history of Rugrats, and it starts off with how Rugrats came to be, and of course we see some of the earlier clips. And having just finished watching all 9 seasons, I've experienced the changes in animation over time, but it's seeing the earlier clips with the newer, I say newer, it's over 2 decades, but the later clips side by side almost is it's quite fascinating. I forgot how really rough around the edges the animation used to be at the beginning, especially Phil and Lil. I'm really glad they were able to fine tune that. It also looks at the kind of stories that the show addressed and talks about how, changes happened over the years. I've just realised I don't think they ever mentioned Spike. I might have missed it, but certainly, or Grandpa. To be honest, the parents, the grown-ups, they weren't really mentioned that much. They were mentioned here and there, so I think they could have done that a little bit more. But generally, it covered pretty much everything. It looked a little bit at kind of its impact within culture. For example, there was apparently a big balloon in a parade, and I don't think it had quite as much of an impact in the UK, at least certainly at the time, but it was very popular, and I'd like to think it still is. Of course, we get to hear from a lot of the voice actors, and we get to see them recording the voices, which I always love. I always love seeing live action footage of voiceover artists recording animated characters' lines. I just think it's so fun. And we do get quite a bit of that here, which I was really pleased with. We get a tiny look at the behind the scenes of the animation and how they animate things. And we also get to find out more about the music, not just the theme song, but the music within the episodes. So it does cover everything, basically. I would have liked to have seen more about the grown ups, and I think I would have liked to have just seen more merchandise. I had Rugrats toys and a Rugrats swim bag, and I think I had a Rugrats beach towel, if I'm not mistaken. And I would have liked to have seen more about how children interacted with the show, with books and magazines and things like that. So if they'd done it a little bit longer, that would have been some good information to include. We did get to hear from some children who were fans of Rugrats, and I didn't really personally care too much for that, but it is quite interesting because when this was released in 2001, I was roughly the age that those children were in this. So I think that was quite fun to see, but generally I could have done without their opinions. But I didn't mind it. It didn't bother me. I just didn't feel like they contributed very much. I know the purpose was to show that children can talk passionately about Rugrats, but for me as a viewer, I didn't really care. But honestly, it didn't affect my enjoyment of it. It was a great celebration of Rugrats. Because Rugrats was still airing and in production when this was released, they talk very hopefully about what the future of Rugrats might look like. And that's kind of sad because Rugrats didn't have a tremendously long shelf life after this. And it did make me wonder what could have been. Somebody, I can't remember who, also very briefly mentioned the idea that we could see Rugrats as parents. Well, actually, they said they don't think people are ready for seeing the Rugrats babies as parents, but I did think that would be quite fascinating in a kind of Full House, Fuller House, next generation sort of thing. And that worked very well. Um, so if anybody ever decides to do that, I'd certainly be keen to watch it. But this is a wonderful documentary. If you're a fan of Rugrats, if you grew up with Rugrats, or if you're watching it now, It's absolutely worth watching. It's a little bit emotional, generally very well done, and something I really thoroughly enjoyed.